coming out to another wonderful CLASSICOPIA program here at the First Congregational Church. This has been our home church now for, I think, 7 or 8 years now, and we are always thankful to use this great space, wonderful acoustics, a wonderful piano. And we have with us, for the first time in the Upper Valley, a wonderful cellist who came up from Baltimore. Actually, she was in Quebec for the summer and has come down, but she actually lives in Baltimore. And we met about a year and a half ago. It's Alicia Ward. She runs the string program at the Peabody Prep program in Baltimore, a really fantastic training program for young students. And I actually met her. I had another cellist friend who came and did a master class at the Peabody Prep program and met Alicia, and then Alicia came to our concert we were doing, and she said, if you ever need young students to play on your concerts, I could provide them. And that's part of our mission is to have these great young students. So over the last year, she has provided incredible 9-year-old cellists playing Bach suites and 11-year-olds playing violin concertos. It's just been astounding. And so I said, if the students are that good, I should probably be playing with their teacher. And so we got together in January. We did this program down in Baltimore. It was the winter, which feels more like a time to do the Russian cello concert, but we're going to do it here. And again, we do dedicate this to the victims now in Ukraine, as it's not meant to glorify any of the Russian stuff going on, but there are some incredible composers, and many of the great Russian composers are really from Ukraine. Prokofiev and Tchaikovsky came from that area. So it's really important that we just bring this music out there, and we'll show on this program how these artists were able to sort of still produce great art in the midst of great repression within the Soviet Union, or as the Soviet Revolution was taking place. So we're going to begin first with Mily Balakirev. This is a name that is not all that familiar to us, but he was one of the Mighty Five, or the Russian Five as they're known, the best-known composers from that group, Mussorgsky and Rimsky-Korsakov and Borodin. But Balakirev was actually the leader of this group. He was the oldest one, and he's the one who sort of put all of these musicians together. And what was fascinating is none of those other composers were professional musicians. Rimsky-Korsakov was a captain in the Navy, Mussorgsky was in the Army, César Cui wrote books about fortifications, and Borodin was a doctor and a chemist. And that was really part of what Balakirev was after with this group, is he didn't believe that professional training was necessary to be a great composer. In fact, he thought many composers were destroyed by too much training. It's a fascinating history, because what was happening at that time in Russia in the middle of the 19th century, there were some new openings in the government led by Alexander II, who had some reforms, freed the serfs, and opened up new educational opportunities. And the most important person at that time was Anton Rubinstein. Now, he was one of the great pianists of his time, and he had a vision that Russia really needed to have great conservatories in order to compete with the rest of Europe. And so he opened the St. Petersburg Conservatory in 1862, and a few years later, the Moscow Conservatory. And his vision was to bring in the great teachers from Germany and France, train this new generation of performers and composers in Russia. And within a generation, by the 1880s, 1890s, some of the greatest violinists and cellists and pianists and composers were coming out of Russia because of the intensely good training that was happening. But Balakirev had a very different vision. He didn't think that a conservatory should be a place where you taught all those old rules about how to compose. He thought he wanted to open up a school. He called it the free music school. One, he wanted to make sure that anybody could go, that you didn't need money to go to the school, and it was absolutely free. He also wanted to concentrate more on the vocal tradition. That was more of the Russian tradition of songs, and so he collected folk songs from around the Russian area, put them into a book in the 1860s, and really focused on that, not about training. And even for composers, he didn't think it was necessary to learn how to compose music. He wanted people to use their instincts and just try things out. In fact, he described the St. Petersburg Conservatory as a place where the professors dress in professional anti-musical togas, pollute their students' minds, and then seal them with various abominations. So he did not think that was the way to learn. He wanted people to experiment. And so there's a wonderful quote that he gave to Rimsky-Korsakov, who was heading off on a mission on the ship. And Balakirev said, while you're out there, you need to write your first symphony. And Rimsky-Korsakov said, I don't know how to write a symphony. And Balakirev apparently said to him, You must plunge boldly into the sea of composition and learn to sink or swim. If you have the talent to swim, so much the better for yourself. If you are unfortunate enough to sink, so much the better for the world. So he was not the nicest guy, but he was a kind of messianic character, I think, to these other figures. He really brought them in with the power of his personality, but he was also, I think, very easily to dismiss people. At some point, Mussorgsky angered him a lot, and Balakirev wrote to his friend Stasov, he said, I no longer have any use for Mussorgsky. His views may tally with mine, but I have never heard him express an intelligent idea. Everything in him is flabby and dull. He is, it seems to me, a thorough idiot. But what was fascinating is that Balakirev in 1872 had some sort of nervous breakdown, and he stopped composing, really stopped talking about music for about 7 or 8 years. In fact, he became a train conductor on the line to Warsaw, and he did that for 7 or 8 years, and many of these students sort of forgot about him and thought he had sort of slipped away. He then does come back into music, but when he came back, he was even much more of a nationalist. He had some rather anti-Semitic views and nationalist views about music, and he has sort of faded away because of that. But he was a very important figure in Russian music to sort of start this whole trend towards a real Russian folk music. The piece we're going to play, though, doesn't sound very Russian at all. In fact, it was a piece that was lost for many years. I think it was only discovered about 20 years ago. It's a romance, and we think it was written in about 1855 or 56, which would make him about 19 or 20 years old when he wrote this. So it's a very youthful piece, and it really has more of a feel of a bel canto opera aria than real Russian music. But it's a nice way to get us into this field, into this concert. Here is Balakirev's Romance for cello and piano. Please do turn off your cell phones. We're recording this here. 1934. Of course, a lot has happened in Russian society. 1917, the big revolution, and Dmitri Shoshstakovich, born in 1906, was at the St. Petersburg Conservatory at the time of the revolution, and it quickly changed to the Petrograd Conservatory while he was there. And he was one of the prize students, a phenomenal pianist, but he also began to start getting into composing when he was a teenager. And he never left Russia. Other composers like Prokofiev and Stravinsky, Rachmaninoff, we'll see, got out. But Shostakovich stayed. And for many years, it was considered that maybe he was a communist and a part of the party. But as we've learned more about him, it really seems that he was just trying to survive in a really difficult time and doing the best he could to sort of play the game within a rather repressive environment. And we're going to see how one of his pieces of music really helped begin the Great Terror that Stalin would start, in which he really tried to impose certain ideas of what art could be. Shostakovich wrote this piece in 1934, as I mentioned, and it was right after he finished his first opera. It was called Lady Macbeth of Mtsensk. And when this opera came out, it was a huge hit in all parts, in Moscow and St. Petersburg. It traveled over to Europe, and it actually made its way over to New York, I think, in 1935. It was a really popular opera. And it was only a year later when everything turned about it. But when it first came out, it was considered rather revolutionary in its ideas. The story itself is a little dark. Shostakovich saw this as the first of a trilogy that he was planning to write. As he described it, he wanted to depict the oppression and liberation of women, first before the revolution, during the revolution, and after the revolution. And so for the story on Lady Macbeth of Mtsensk, it tells the story of a woman named Katerina Ismailova, and it's based upon a book that was written by Nikolai Leskov in 1865. Now, in the book, the book takes a rather dark, grim view of this woman who ultimately she's married to this guy who is running he's kind of a merchant. She ends up having an affair with one of his workers. They later then kill her husband and then her father-in-law as well. And then when her new man begins having an affair with another woman, she kills both of them as well. So it's a little dark, but Shostakovich saw this in a very different light, I think, than the book saw it. He really saw Ismailova, this woman, as a hero, as a heroine. He said, I felt complete empathy for her. She was surrounded by monsters. And he saw her as the tragic portrayal of the destiny of a talented, smart, outstanding woman dying in the nightmarish atmosphere of pre-revolutionary Russia. Murder was the only means of revolt in the male-dominated hell of the Tsarist epic. So you can see how maybe in the beginning the revolutionary figures might have thought this was pretty good. Here he was sort of tearing down the Tsarist, the earlier ideas, and saying what the revolution was going to bring for women. But in the movie, in the opera, it's a rather sensuous, erotic kind of opera. There's lots of moments of sliding trombones when things are happening on the stage. And this seemed to terrify Stalin when he went to see this opera in 1936. Again, the opera had been successful. Stalin decided he wanted to see what it was all about. He went and he left in the second act, which is never a good thing if you're the composer. Shostakovich said he turned white as a sheet when he saw Stalin leave. The next day, there appeared in Pravda an article, many people think written by Stalin himself, and it was called Muddle Instead of Music. And in it said the following. In this opera, singing is replaced by shrieking. The music just quacks, hoots, growls, and gasps to express the love scenes as naturally as possible. It is only successful because it tickles the perverted taste of the bourgeoisie with its fidgety, screaming, neurotic music. The ability of good music to enthrall the masses has been sacrificed on the altar of petit bourgeois formalism. This is playing at abstruseness, and such games can only finish badly. So Shostakovich was actually working on his Fourth Symphony at the time, which is a rather dissonant kind of a bourgeois piece, I guess. He pulled that back and decided he would start another symphony that would be a little bit more about the Russian people, and that's when he writes his Fifth Symphony, still his most popular symphony. I think there's a lot of irony in that symphony if you read it, if you listen to it without being on the surface. But Shostakovich clearly put this out as a way to sort of get back into good graces. And in fact, he subtitled the symphony, "A Soviet Artist's Response to Just Criticism." He was clearly trying to find a way to stay alive. And many of his friends who were writers or artists were being taken away and sent off to Siberia or killed in the middle of this repression. In fact, Shostakovich's biographer said that for many years after this, Shostakovich would wait for his arrest at night out on the landing by the lift so that at least his family would not be disturbed. So it was a difficult time, and Shostakovich really found a way to play the game. He even would write pieces like his incredible trio that uses Jewish themes, which were really not allowed, but it was sort of hidden in the music in a certain way. So I think he really needs to be looked at again in a way that when artists are really struggling, being told what to do, sometimes you have to resort to many different things. Now, this piece was written, as I mentioned, just before all of this came down. It was the summer of 1934. He got married in 1932 to his wife Nina, but they were having some problems, and then he went off this summer to a music festival and fell madly in love with a 20-year-old translator named Yelena Konstantinovskaya. We have some letters that he wrote to her. One says, "There is nothing in you, Yelena, which fails to send a wave of joy and fierce passion within me when I think of you. I love you so, as nobody has ever loved before. My love, my gold, my dearest, I lay down my love before you." And the first movement of this piece, there's an opening theme which sort of wanders a little bit, but right after that first theme, the piano has this incredibly romantic theme. I think the most romantic theme that Shostakovich ever wrote. Beautiful love song, and then the cello takes it, and it's really just an incredible moment. But at the end of that movement, we get the first theme coming back, but at a very slow tempo, almost as if the music stops. It really feels like the music is in slow motion, and Shostakovich is kind of looking back at himself and wondering if this is the right thing to be doing. He did, in fact, find out after this summer that his wife was pregnant with their first child, and they ended up getting back together, he and his wife. And interestingly, poor Yelena got denounced anonymously and spent a year in prison. We certainly don't know exactly who did that, but it doesn't look good for Shostakovich. But this whole piece sort of relates a little bit to that moment in his life. And then we have this incredible second movement with this kind of grotesque dance. The cello has these wonderful glissando harmonics, where she's sliding up and down, has a very eerie quality to it, but it ends with a wonderful bang. Then the third movement is this very slow, agonizingly desolate movement that Shostakovich would often write, these third movements again, which almost stand still, but there's just some pain in that one. And then a wonderful last movement. And all through this piece, there's this little motive, the bum, 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 that seems to appear in a lot of Shostakovich pieces, a kind of marching movement of troops amassing somewhere and sort of predicting what would happen in society as we get towards World War II. The last movement, though, starts off with a very fun, peasanty kind of folk song, and then towards the end of the movement, there's a moment when the pianist has to go a little bit crazy, starts playing all of these scales that don't seem to relate to each other. Some have said that maybe Shostakovich was remembering his time at the conservatory, and when you'd stand in the hallway and you could hear everybody practicing their scales, but it was just a cacophony of scales going on. For a moment, it feels that way, and then we return to this kind of folk-like tune to finish off. So it's a dark piece, but it really gets you thinking. We hope you enjoy the Shostakovich D minor cello sonata. After this, we'll just take about a 10-minute break. There are 2 bathrooms back here which will be available, and then we'll come back for some wonderful Rachmaninoff. 10 minutes